Okay, welcome everybody. Let's do Refuge and Bodhicitta. Sangye Junon Zogi Junam Lai Jancho Badu Dani Kapsu Chi Dagi Chunyan Gi Pe Sonam Gi Adrola Penjia Sangye Drupa Sho Sangye Chudon Zogi Junam La Jancho Badu Dani Kapsu Chi Dagi Chunyan Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola penjia sange drupa sho sange chudon sogi chunam lai jancho padu dani kapsu chi dagi chunyangi pe sonam gi rola penjia sange drupa sho. Okay, it's really wonderful to see all you Sangha, and looks like there's some lay folks here as well. I think I know maybe half of you. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Yönten, and I've been a nun for about 20 years, a little more than 20 years. And during that time, I have pretty much 80% been in community. So different communities. The first maybe 7, 8 years was at Chenrezig Institute, and then places like Tusamling and places in New Zealand. And then sometimes in very tiny centers where there was maybe only one other monastic. And just recently, I've moved to Portland, where I'm the only monastic. And when I lived in Israel half the year, I was the only monastic. So I'm just speaking from my experience of what's worked and what hasn't worked, my different areas of interest, because community is a special passion of mine. I really value community and have also found it one of the most frustrating things in my life, one of the most delightful things in my life. And I'm really interested to collaborate with all of you more about how to keep monastic life relevant in the 21st century, using all of the traditional techniques, using the Vinaya, as well as using the modern things we know about healthy communication, healthy family dynamics, for lack of a better word, and just ways to support each other on the Dharma path. So a lot of you have been monastics a long time. There's a few of you that are newer, maybe some people considering monasticism. So let's treat this talk kind of like a community conversation. So I'll just kind of throw some issues out there and discuss a few things that I've noticed over time. And then I'm really curious to hear from you about what you've noticed, what works and what doesn't. And let's work together to make the healthiest IMI we possibly can, as well as create the cause for the fourfold Sangha to exist forever. So I love these verses from King of Prayers. I think all of us know these verses from King of Prayers. It's towards the middle or towards the end where it says, "May I practice constantly for eons to come, perfecting the activities of awakening, acting in harmony with the various dispositions of beings, showing the ways of a bodhisattva. May I always have the friendship of those whose path is like mine. And with body, words, and also mind, may we practice together the same aspirations and activities." So when I look at those verses, I really think about what is companionship, what is friendship, what is Sangha, and what is it to be in alignment. So when we're together, I think that we can really start to feel like community should be like a bunch of friends. And I think that that's where some of the problem happens. Like we have kind of an expectation when we're all together that there will be common rapport, that there will be easy ways of relating and communicating, that we will have things in common. And we've probably all noticed that what we have in common is the Dharma, but sometimes very little else. We have the Dharma in common. We love the Dharma, but even our approach to the Dharma or our access into it or our history of it has been really unique and specific to us as individuals. And so here we are all together practicing loving the Dharma, having similar teachers, and a surprising amount of differences between us, which can make us feel not connected to the people that we're seeing all the time. So when there's an expectation of friendship, I think that that can set us up for a lot of disappointment and attachment. If the expectation is more like, how do you feel about family? You know, some of your family members you don't relate to at all, but you have a sense of kinship or a sense of connection because you've branded them family. And so there's just kind of a baseline assumption that you're not going to give up on each other unless things get really, really unethical or toxic. And even then, you're not giving up on each other. You're maybe just making distance. So what I'm finding over time is that as soon as I start to think of my fellow monastics as having to be my friends, that's where trouble becomes. When I think of them as family, there's a relaxation that happens, and my expectations are different and a little bit more in alignment with relative reality. So I don't know how you guys have felt about this over time, but I think that one of the glues that holds us together when we're in community is shared experience. And shared experience doesn't mean we're all having the same experience, but doing things together like puja, doing things together like class, doing things together like chores, working, physically, to keep things clean, to keep things well maintained, to make things beautiful. These things are sometimes like a checklist of who's going to do what. But as much as possible, doing these things together creates more and more hours of time of shared experience, which is actually some of the fundamental glue for community. And so I remember when I lived at Chenrezig Institute, I was the Gompa manager for a while when I was a baby nun. And my job was to get everyone organized to clean the Gompa and make it beautiful. And of course, immediately comes everyone's preferences. Oh, I don't do dusting. I have asthma. I can't mop. My back hurts. I actually have something more important to do. I'm going to go study. Study is more important than cleaning. But you guys that don't study, you should do the cleaning. And immediately, this very basic weekly thing became like an invitation for drama. And I was so surprised because when I was a baby nun, I was in my early 20s. And prior to that, I had done a lot of activist work in my community, a lot of grassroots organizing, a lot of working with nonprofits. And part of the fun was like setting up for a conference or cleaning up after an event. And that's where we could all kind of relax and just hang out together and joke and tell stories and remind each other of the good things that happened. So I was surprised when I got to these situations in Dharma communities where there was this resistance to doing ordinary tasks. I was really surprised. And it is understandable. We're busy. We have a lot of pressure, perhaps, that we put on ourselves to memorize things, to achieve things. We have a strange form of worldly ambition that creeps into our Dharma life. And there's subtle or not so subtle competitiveness that creeps in. And when all that stuff comes together, what it looks like is entitlement. Like I'm entitled to be different to my peers, or I'm entitled to do superior work while other people do inferior work. And I think that whole premise needs to be challenged because in a way, all work can be seen through the light of lacking inherent existence. And we know millions of stories from Sutra of the ordinary monk sweeping the floor, getting enlightened before the monk who memorized all the texts. We know these stories. And yet somehow when it comes to us, we still feel a little bit like we're a special case. There's something a little bit precious in how we see ourselves. And that very factor, of course, driven by pride and insecurity and is all very human, but that very fact is part of what keeps us isolated and alienated and feeling separate from each other. And so when you're living a monastic life, you could be surrounded by people wearing the same clothes, having the same vows, but feel fundamentally disconnected from them. And then you wonder, why don't they check on me? Why don't they reach out to me? Why don't they wonder about me? Why don't they ask questions about me? Instead of doing that wondering, asking yourself, am I finding opportunities for connection? Am I finding opportunities for shared experience? Am I really looking deeply at how magic it is to be a monastic? Because a lot of the surface minutia, the surface details, really don't have to be as important anymore, because we all agree that the Dharma is the most important thing, and how wonderful it is to have organized a lifestyle where potentially the Dharma could be our focus. How wonderful it is that we get to share space with other people who feel the same. And so I think for me personally, and you have to ask yourself what works for you, but for me personally, one of the things that has helped me feel deep connection is just showing up again and again to the ordinary, boring things, to the things that I don't yet relate to the events that wouldn't be my preference, as well as all of the things that I find uplifting and enriching and invigorating. Showing up to the Gompa clean, showing up to, sorting out handouts, showing up to rebuilding the deck, sanding the floors, showing up to things while at the same time not compromising my needs as an individual. So if you have asthma, don't do the dusting, sure, but find an alternative. Don't just make it a full sentence of, nope, sorry. Because the first detriment is actually to you. Of course, it kind of lets down the group energy when people don't show up. But the first thing happens is that you feel kind of guilty and defensive and full of justification. And then maybe you soothe yourself with excuses and quietly go to your corner all alone. And one of the biggest things that makes us feel isolated is pride, because we're just a little too good for the ordinary activities, or we're a little too nervous at being caught out for not having the same, I guess, abilities as other people. So maybe we don't show up for a discussion group because we're annoyed at other people's discussions. But secretly, it's because we're worried people will find out we don't know that much about a certain topic. So pride is going to kill connection. Pride will kill connection. And I think that the people that have lasted, you see that they have that beautiful combination of humility and confidence. Humility and confidence together seems to be a recipe for a sustainable monastic life. The confidence is coming from a deep belief in your Buddha nature, a deep belief in your ability to learn new things. But it's not about what you've achieved. It's not about performing. It's not about proving. Yeah, so you don't walk up to every new person at the Dharma Center with your resume and say, here are the things I've done, the things that I've known, the things that I am. Take me seriously, respect me. Yeah, and if you don't, then I feel angry or lost or disempowered. We kind of walk around sometimes with this big facade of, I am already perfect, forgetting that our whole practice is working towards perfection, which means, of course, we're not perfect. And it's so much easier to connect with other people when you have that type of vulnerability and humility combined with confidence. So, you know, I often think of His Holiness when he's in one of those like mind and life conferences surrounded by all of those scientists. Can you picture him in like one of those panels? And there's these fancy people with fancy titles, and they've come up with some brilliant discovery from science that Buddhism has known for thousands of years. And the scientists are like, guess what? It's a breakthrough. His Holiness doesn't say, yes, I already know that, or yes, Buddhism already knows that. He doesn't do that ever. He just says, wonderful. Wonderful. And he means it. You can feel it that he means it. Wonderful. He has nothing to prove. He doesn't need to dominate the conversation with his intelligence or his realizations. He doesn't have to prove that Buddhism is superior. He's just happy other people are coming to truth. And he's wanting to support that, I think. So if we're sort of adopting this attitude when we're with each other of celebrating people when they're doing the right thing and when they're coming to new ideas and new realizations and new connections, without feeling like we need to then prove that we know the same thing or we know more or better. Pride kills connection. So that's one of the things that I think has really shown itself to be true in every country that I've lived in, every community that I've lived in, that it's just so much easier if you're humble and confident. Do you guys agree? Have you had that experience when you're in community, that combination of humility and confidence helps facilitate connection and just being more relaxed with each other? What do you think? Say again?
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, I wait first if other people say something, because I like to give the platform to others. But yeah, of course, we live here also in community, and I really recognize, I also recognize the obstacle, like what you say, like pride makes you quicker go alone to your room, or yeah. And it's not so easy indeed to to be Gompa manager or manager anyway, where people all withdraw and they feel entitled not to participate. It happens also a lot everywhere. And there is indeed what you say. There's reasons, like there's a lot of expectations to come to Pujas, to study, to know, to help, and to keep your personal practice and then have a good feeling about yourself the whole time while you run out of energy. Community life is not so easy, but I found a lot of essential tools. You say, like this we have to keep. But maybe you can say something about like these two qualities, humbleness and confidence, to how to keep that, or how to keep that in mind, or how to support each other to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Let's unpack that more. Venerable Metok, did you want to add something?
Yes. I wanted to say, I have just been reading a book, and it was written by a psychologist, and they were wondering, when there's a community of people and they have a discussion and they want to make a decision, whom are the people the group is listening to? And what they find out, it is the people who are most confident.
Mm.
What they did, of course, not check out is a combination of confidence and humility, or being humble. And I think this is an extremely important combination, because in a lot of cases, the people who are very confident, they lack to be humble. And they are very sure of themselves and maybe having kind of a big ego. And if this type of person are confident and are dominating the group, I think this is a big problem. So I think this combination of being humble and confident is a very important one. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and because we're all you know, how to say, hardcore Buddhists in this room, or people that are very much invested in Buddhism and have studied a while, I can tell you what I really think about confidence and humility. If I was talking to like a general group or new people, I would put it in gentler terms. But for you, I can just go straight to it and say, humility comes from thinking about dependent arising. Humility comes from thinking about dependent arising because you think, all right, there are things I am good at, genuinely, from a worldly perspective, objectively good at, but how? Why? It was learned. Everything was learned. I didn't just magically do this or that or this or that. It wasn't some intrinsic characteristic in my being. It's because of learning and circumstance, conditions. So you can feel happy that, say, you're good at, I don't know, working on spreadsheets, I don't know, or you're good at, bringing people together with good facilitation skills, or that you're good at leading a puja and you have a beautiful voice. You can be happy about those things because they facilitate our work for sentient beings. And then also you remember that was learned. Someone showed you, someone supported you, circumstances enriched it. And even if it's things like your own patience, you feel happy about having patience, and nobody taught you patience on purpose, but of course your enemies taught you patience even if they didn't mean to, right? Or your difficult life circumstances and your traumas and your hardships, together with the Dharma, are why you're patient. So you're holding this deep value of the things you've, quote, achieved in this life, while at the same time acknowledging the like infinite dependent arising that brought it about. So how can you feel arrogant or proud or ownership of those things when you know they lack inherent existence? So humility is fed by remembering dependent arising again and again. And confidence is fed by remembering Buddha nature. Yeah, you're remembering my potential is enlightenment. I might be silly and, get a parking ticket, or I might stumble over my words when I'm trying to explain something, or I might forget an important definition that I learned years ago. But none of that really matters. I'm working towards enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. My mind lacks inherent existence, therefore it can develop. And so you just keep, like, we talk so much about identitylessness in Buddhism, about selflessness. But if we want like a shortcut or like an intermediate step, sometimes it can help to think, well, if there's anywhere to place identity, it's on my Buddha nature, even though my Buddha nature also does not inherently exist. If there was ever anywhere to land, it would be on that sense of potentiality. And so that can bring the deepest kind of confidence, because it's nothing to do with achievement. It's nothing to do with what you've already done. But you have this fundamental understanding that you are better than you were at some things when you worked at it, which shows you the mind is trainable, which reinforces that confidence that eventually we'll get there. But it doesn't trigger pride, because everyone else has Buddha nature too. You're not special, so no worries. Yeah. So this delicate dance, it's so difficult because not everyone else will play along, right? Just because you start getting really good at humility and confidence doesn't mean that the people around you won't be shrouded by their insecurity and their arrogance. And then how do you work with them when their negative states of mind are all stirred up, and when they're not being logical and they're not being kind, and you feel embarrassed to share a community with them? You feel like they're reflecting poorly on the Dharma, reflecting poorly on the monastic community, and here they are sitting next to you. What do you do then? And, you know, then maybe the bigger community goes, oh, monks and nuns are not so special. Look at that one. That one is dodgy, right? Or that one is inconsistent, or that one is unkind. And you might be fine generally, just a regular person with your faults. But what if there's someone in community who is very toxic and pulling focus with a lot of aggression and a lot of anger? Or what if they have a lot of mental illness and they're really unstable and they're really fragile, or they're doing strange things? I'm guessing all of us have come across this in community where there's someone who is pulling a lot of focus and energy. And they're not playing along with the agenda of trying to develop their confidence and their humility. They're just trying to stay on top of their negative states of mind in their coarsest form. And yet they have amazing imprints for monasticism. We know people like this? I'm sure all of us know people like this. Dharma centers attract people like this. And monastics, particularly Western monastics, often have a bigger percentage of people like this than maybe Asian communities because of the particular unique situation of Westerners needing to be a bit more bold and radical in order to have this lifestyle, because it's not held as well as it is in Asia. So that means you're going to get more unique characters. And so then the question becomes, all right, harmony within myself and within my fellow man is easier if I just keep showing up to the ordinary things, to the advanced things, just keep showing up at a pace that's sustainable and logical. And internally, I keep working on my humility and my confidence. But what about these ones that pull focus? What about these ones that pull focus? And fortunately, the Vinaya has a lot to say. The Vinaya has all sorts of things to say about conflict resolution, but sometimes we don't have the opportunity to study those sections. So I think that it's important to kind of take away our assumptions about what is driving someone's bad behavior and just look at the behavior, and is it something that can be dealt with or not? Yeah, so sometimes we spend, I don't know, at least in the communities I've lived in, a lot of time and a lot of words trying to figure out, why is so-and-so like that, whatever like that is. Why are they like that? Well, they're like that because of ignorance and suffering, okay? We know that. They're like that because of disturbing emotions. The rest is details, whether it's a chemical imbalance, a mental illness, a trauma, whatever the case may be. We know they came by it through countless causes and conditions. Our job is really just to ask, are there behaviors, ones our community can hold or not? Yeah, and the rest is like, mind your own business. Mind your own business. So you're asking yourself, all right, I feel a little uncomfortable when they do this or this or this or this. Standing back from it, is it harmful or not? Does it have a ripple effect of harm? Because what can happen is that we get so used to lojong, we get so used to thought transformation, that we thought transformation ourselves out of common sense. Yeah, that we get so good at reframing the situation that we don't look at the immediate problem, which is that perhaps someone needs professional help. And they're using the Dharma Center or the monastic community as a safe place with kind people who won't hurt them, but they're not actually getting any better because they don't have the fundamental supports they need in terms of their mental health. So the community then needs to ask the questions about, are we the right place to facilitate their healing or not? And most Dharma centers don't have like an on-site counselor or enough people to absorb folks with severe mental health issues. But sometimes we do. Sometimes it's like there's enough of a window and enough of a softness in the person that you can start to talk to them and work with them around their mental health issues, and they do get better in community, particularly if it's something like kind of generic depression. sometimes, or anxiety, some of those things, if they have enough insight about their own situation, together with the love of the community, they can get better and they might not need to get professional help. But if it's a severe mental health issue like schizophrenia, I think sometimes we are a little bit lazy and we don't talk to each other about, actually, this person needs more help than we can give them. We need to make a strategy to really support them in the best way, collaborating with them in that decision in the most respectful way possible. So there's that mental health side. The other side is just repetitive toxic behavior, like maybe very unkind patterns of criticism and gossip that just are constant. And the person is just constantly critical about every single thing, about their fellow monastics, about the Dharma Center, about the structural organization, about their cushion, about their socks, about the weather, about everything. And they've just gotten into a role, a habit of like spotlighting everything with anger. And that can happen to any of us. That can happen to any of us. And it can happen to us because of a place of deep sadness and grief, but also attachment not getting what it wants. When attachment doesn't get what it wants, anger is right on the heels. We've been taught this a million times. So that's not a mental health issue. That's a human issue. But do we let people get away with it or not? How much? When? These are really big questions because we don't want to be constantly correcting each other. We're adults, yeah? And all of us fall into patterns like that at various times in our life, and it's very embarrassing to be called out. And yet, what is the role of community if not to be mirrors for each other? Mirrors that are kind in their reflection, though. And so here's where we get into what is skillful means. So some situations you don't talk about in a big public meeting or in a little Sangha meeting. It's something that needs their good friend to talk to them directly or a senior monastic to talk to them directly. And usually that is the first step. Yeah. But if that's not working, sometimes you need to open it to a community meeting and say, there is a behavior, and we're not naming names, but this is a behavior that I think all of us as a community want to work on. And so you're not, shaming them. You're not pointing them out. You're not picking at them, but you're saying, do we agree as a community that sometimes we've gotten a habit of criticism? Can we watch the way in which we do that and make sure it's always about problem solving and about working through our own practice and not about just picking at each other and picking at everything? So feeling the boldness to bring things like this up in monastic meetings takes some courage because you're kind of opening yourself up for scrutiny. You say, okay, everyone, do we agree? We have gotten a little bit critical, and a lot of us have been like bad mouthing about the management. And then someone might say, yeah, like you, you do it too. And I was like, yeah, I do it too. Are we all in agreement that we want to work on it? And then it's collaborative and it doesn't have that pressure of hierarchy or being scolded like you're in school. It's about, let's just help each other be better. So if you guys are thinking about like different monastic meetings, when you've had a big issue come up, whether it's a communication issue or an ethics issue or something that there's been tension, what so far has helped you guys have that conversation in the first place, to bring it up in the first place? What helps you name the tension? Or have you been able to name the tension? You just all quietly do Lojong in the corner and hopes it goes away.
No, maybe it's the monks do it more than nuns, but they very quickly go to rules. Like, this was the rule. Everyone like should come in time, or everyone should be there, and this is all obligatory. Bang. So
Yeah, just return to rules.
yes, yeah.
Does it work, do you feel, generally?
But it does not pull in the atmosphere, does not pull the feelings of the people in. So they might say yes, and we do our best, and we will do a little bit more our best, but it's not really sometimes shared. Like the one who emphasizes a rule, there might be one or two monks who say, "Oh yes, yes, I agree with you," but it does not end up like, okay, this is really shared. You know?
It
Yeah.
calms the situation, but it stirs more resentment, quiet resentment. So yeah.
It makes everyone more polite on the surface. Look, and this is the thing, isn't it? To like how to be honest about your emotional state without identifying with your emotional state. I mean, this is like all of us as Dharma practitioners, but I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but I remember sometimes in nuns meetings, especially when I lived in Australia, and Australia has a strong British influence and they don't talk about emotions very easily. And I'm American and I grew up in the Northwest where we talk about emotions very easily. And my father is a therapist. So I was already like, here we go, team, let's talk about emotions. Yeah. And the Australians would just be silent. And, and I might say something like, I'm feeling a little bit, I don't know, just kind of like it's tense sometimes right before class. Like we're not sure if we should talk to each other before class or if we're supposed to wait silently while we stand. Is there like a time limit? Like, is it just the 5 minutes before class we should be silent? Or is it 12 minutes or how long? And I don't know, but it feels tense, you guys. Yeah. And just silence, right? Just silence. And it was almost like naming that there was tension made it more tense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so I was like, all right, maybe I won't talk about that anymore. And there was a great benefit to living with Australians because I worked on my own mind more and stopped talking and processing endlessly like Americans do. It helped me. But then on the other hand, I kind of miss being able to just, I guess, unapologetically state how I was in any moment without needing to justify. Like I could say I'm feeling grumpy and not have a bunch of nuns jump on my back and say, grumpiness is actually anger and anger is never justified. Anger is the wish to harm and you're going to kill all of your roots of virtue and you're going to burn through eons of merit. So you know that you really shouldn't be grumpy. And I'd be like, well, yeah, I know. I've been to the same teachings as you. I'm just having a bad day. And so, I'm trying not to identify with it. I'm sharing it with you to hopefully make it last a shorter duration. I want to workshop it or I want to connect, whatever. But you know how this happens, right? You just state what's going on for you and people jump down your throat with the Dharma answer before just being like, oh, isn't that hard? I hate it when that happens. So something about also being a monastic in the West, we're always a little bit on when we're around the lay community because they're looking to us for an example or for advice. Sometimes we forget then when we're with each other, we're not necessarily asking for advice. We're just wanting to connect and share a human experience and just be real. And when someone says, oh, I'm feeling a bit lonely today or I'm feeling a bit grumpy today, that they might not be asking for any advice whatsoever. We're just used to the lay people doing that. And so we come out with oh, here are some methods, here are some remedies, I know some things you could try to think about. Not helpful. We forget who we're with sometimes and that we can actually let our hair down with each other. And that's part of what facilitates connection. Yes, please, Venerable.
Yeah, Jamyang. So I listen sometimes to podcasts of some therapists.
Mm.
So one very brilliant idea is that when somebody is giving their emotions to us and talking, to ask them, do you want advice? Do you want me just to listen, or do you need a hug? You know?
Exactly. That's perfect. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing advice.
Yeah, I know. It's so simple, but it's just practical, isn't it? And, and so I think what can also be useful is to just kind of remember, why did we do this in the first place? Why did we decide in the first place to become monastics? And then to really feel like, even if my details are a little different, all of us share this. Can I kind of relax back into that commonality, even if otherwise we're not the same? So I was thinking a little bit about the different ways that we are ordained in the West. And there's, there's this like, some of us in community and some of us in isolation. And there's pros and cons to both, right? But like, if we're thinking about when you live in isolation, there's actually two different ways. Like, there's the literal isolation when you're doing your meditation practice. And then there's the isolation of being the only monastic in a place. So I was thinking about how that can make us a little bit jangly, or a little bit, I don't know, funny when we get with other monastics again. If we've been by ourselves for a while, either by ourselves in retreat or by ourselves within a community where there's no other monks and nuns. This is also another time where we can kind of get set in our ways and become very certain that our way of practicing monastic life is the correct one, or we're worried that the ways that we're not perfect will be seen. And so then when we're with other monastics, sometimes if we've been alone for a while, that can create a dissonance. Have you ever felt this? Right? Either when you've been in retreat for a while by yourself, or you've been in a Dharma center being the only monastic, or maybe you're like looking after your parents who are unwell and you've just been, hanging out with them and nobody else. But sometimes this can be one of the ways in which disharmony comes in, is that we just haven't been with each other. And so then when we re-enter a monastic community, there's an awkwardness. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that awkwardness, because I think part of it is worry that we're going to be judged. Yeah, worry that we're going to be judged for not being up to the standard of whatever community that we're going into, or we think we're better than everyone in that community. Either direction, it's awkward and jangly. And, I was just thinking about how easy it is when you're in like Dharamsala or you're in Bodh Gaya and there's like hundreds and hundreds of monastics, and some of them are like completely disheveled with long hair and their shantabs are dragging in the dirt. And some of them are perfectly dressed with like ironed shantabs and ironed dongas, and they're looking like crisp and clean. And then everybody in between. And some of them you're like, I don't even know if that's a monk or a nun. And some of them are like lay people wearing only maroon. And it's just like life. Yeah. And somehow, because there's so many of us, there's less pressure. Do you feel that? But when there's like a small number, the scrutiny is more sometimes. The criticism or observation is more intense when there's only a handful of you, or when you've been away and then you come back in. So it's something about softening your gaze of yourself and of others when you're re-entering, and somehow keeping the sense of humor that knows there are many correct ways, and also we are never going to be perfect. Both. And then you laugh at yourself when you do something silly, like you put your chugyu on upside down or something, and someone says, your chugyu's on upside down. It's not a moral issue, is it? It's not an ethical issue, right? You just go, oh, whoops, switch. But sometimes we get so tense and so defensive that even something as simple as putting your chugyu on upside down feels like this huge issue. And then you're all, I know, I actually know that it goes this way. I actually know the whole history of chugyus. I actually, and you have to like do all these bullet points about why you're not an idiot, you know? And it could just be, oh yeah, ha, switch. Yeah. So somehow it's like naming the opportunities where tension can arise and then preempting it for yourself. So I think that's a useful exercise when we're trying to build more harmony, is to ask yourself, when do I get tense? When do I get awkward? When am I not feeling in sync with my other monastics? And what are ways where I can be the one to start creating the relaxed atmosphere? They can come along with me or not. Everyone's on their own path, but I don't need to come in with my tension. And that's a great offering to sentient beings, to manage your own tension before you go in, and to have that kind of spaciousness where you can laugh at yourself when corrected. Do you know what I mean? So it's that isolation, there's benefits and disadvantages, and knowing that, you know, whatever the benefits and disadvantages of isolation, the re-entry when you're back with other monastics, there is often a tension and an awkwardness. And if you know that or remember that going in, it actually gives you some more space with it. Yeah. Maybe this happened to some of us after the lockdown. Yeah, if you were not in lockdown in community, if you were locked down by yourself. I was with my parents for the first time in 20 years in Montana. There are no other monks and nuns in Helena, Montana. I was the only one. And you know, I'm driving like a pickup truck, you know, and living on a farm, and there's, you know, all sorts of cowboys around, and I'm going to the grocery store and they look at me like, what? You know, and I, of course, was used to visiting, but I was not used to living in that way where I was other day after day after day after day, just being other. And some of you live that way all the time, where you're always other. And you know, some days you're like, I'm representing the Dharma, I'm going to be open and kind to everyone. And some days you're probably like, I hope no one notices me, I just need to get a sandwich, you know, and it can go all different ways. But that kind of thing, you can get into feeling like you're the only one on earth that feels this way, forgetting that there's actually hundreds of Western monastics who live by themselves and who experience that kind of isolation, the pros and cons of it as well. And they're just as justifiably monastic as those of us that live in community. So these are the sort of things. Then there's like living in community pros and cons, which I think we have talked about a bit. Benefits and disadvantages. It's all, you know, happy chappies living together, working together, driving each other crazy, millions of different things there. But I think that the biggest advantage of living together is access to Dharma. When you are in community, it's more merit. There's more lamas, there's more teachings, there's more facilities, and there is something indescribable about practice done together. And there's sutra quotations and Lama Zopa Rinpoche quotations about why the merit is more when you do it together. But I think you feel it even if you're doing something as simple as 5 minutes of shamatha in a group. You're held differently than doing it by yourself. Of course, there can be great advantages in doing it by yourself as well. But if when you're feeling that disconnect from community, coming back to friendship is a bonus, what I'm really here for is this interdependence and this connection that builds so much more merit than being by myself. If we can be friends, that's a wonderful bonus, but really there's something much deeper at play in our shared experience practicing together. Yeah, and that can maybe somehow make you more patient with each other on the less friendly days. You know, when we have disputes in the Vinaya, they talk about these 4 kinds. And I feel like it's useful to look at that these have existed since the time of the Buddha that we aren't really that different. Sometimes we worry that in modern life we're too different and will this work? But in the time of the Buddha, okay, oral disputes, these arise when monastics hold differing views regarding Dharma practice. Oh, this never comes up anymore, does it? And you're like, right, yeah, that is lots of the disputes. Then there's disputes arising from censure or severe disapproval. So there's been an event, there's been a mistake, it's been dealt with, but everyone still is like holding a grudge and they're still looking down at that person and they keep bringing it up again and again. And then there's disputes arising from different views regarding offenses, right? So like how to deal with issues. Yeah. And there's all these kind of disputes that arise, and then disputes arising from the previous three. So, I mean, I think it's interesting to just look at, this is a framework that's in the Vinaya that's interesting to kind of explore how it's still relevant today. But I think it asks a question about when and how does seniority matter? Because seniority or the hierarchy is sometimes one of the reasons for disharmony. So I put two different models, like here's an example of like an informal lunch at a restaurant. Does seniority matter? No. At a formal teaching in the Gompa, does seniority matter? Sort of, right? Okay, so seniority is one of those things that I think sometimes gives a little bit of an opportunity for conflict. Have you found this to be the case? Yeah, who is ordained first, who is ordained second, who is ordained third, who is fully ordained, who is a Getzel or Getzuma, who is a Rabjung or Rabjungma, who gave you your vows, how long were you Buddhist before you got ordained? All of these things are, you know, they come up when we're feeling insecure. So I think it becomes really important to ask, when is it important? Why is it important? And really asking yourselves, what type of seniority? So when we're talking about like who got ordained first, when is that important? It's important in the context of receiving offerings. Yeah, who gets the envelope first in a puja? It goes in order. Okay, no worries. So sit in order, it makes it easier. If you're all hanging out at a restaurant, do you need to give the waitress your orders in order? Probably not, right? Probably not. If you're waiting in line for a lama and you're all holding your katas, do you need to be in seniority order? Some people say yes, some people say no. The tension is what causes the conflict. Yeah, the disagreement. Should we be in order or shouldn't we? And really, my Vinaya teacher in Taiwan used to say, the best rule is, what is the law of the land? If this Dharma center says yes, then yes. If this Dharma says no, then no. There is an argument for either. There are many correct ways. There are so few things more important than harmony. So if at this Dharma center, they want you to line up in order, go with it. If at that Dharma center, they don't care, don't care. That kind of flexibility is hard for us sometimes, especially when we are used to one way. If we've only been at one Dharma center, or if we've only been ordained a short period of time, we take that example as correct. And it is correct, but it's one of many correct ways. And so for me, when I'm traveling, my mantra is, there are many correct ways. There are many correct ways. There are many correct ways. And so then I don't feel bashful or ashamed or embarrassed if the way that I learned is different to what they expect of me at a different Dharma center. Because that can trigger defensiveness. You think, oh, but I learned it different. Am I bad? Or I learned it different. I'm correct. Either way is a recipe for afflictions. But if the mantra is, there are many correct ways, if it's ethical, let it go. It's really, if it's not ethical, do you need to sort of stand your ground, right? Do you agree? Do you feel like sometimes this is where tension comes in, is just kind of what is correct somehow related to seniority? This can get like a tension. And I think what's important in the West too is that because so many of us were ordained as adults, that we recognize the different forms of seniority. Like there's who got vows first. There's also who knows the tech, or who knows the ritual, or who is able to facilitate meetings. These are all different forms of seniority that actually make a more harmonious community if we acknowledge them. So, you know, I remember there was one Dharma center that had a strange idea that the most senior monastic had to be the one that led the pujas. That was their rule. And I'm like, but what if the most senior monastic can't sing? Like, what if they don't know how to chant? What if they never learn the tunes? What is the criteria for this decision? So, you know, you can gently push back if there's something that's not working. But if it's really important to them, all right, whatever. If they don't mind, proceed, you know? But I think if you can sort of sit within your communities of there are different forms of seniority, and the bottom line is there's a reason to respect everyone. There's a reason to respect everyone. And, you know, I think that it becomes really interesting to see how age, like physical age, exists in our Dharma centers, because it's top heavy, isn't it? Most people are over 40. And I remember when I was first ordained and I was 21, it felt very normal to be the youngest one at 21. But now I'm in my 40s and I'm still the youngest one. And that feels very strange. Yeah. And I think that there's something about the way that we hold seniority as an organization that can be a little bit alienating to young people, because we're not acknowledging their forms of seniority. So there are things that come with age, 100%. There's a wisdom that comes with age. There's a wisdom that comes from long-term Dharma practice. But there's also wisdom about the modern age and about technology and new ways of communication, new ways of talking about politics or climate that the kids can show us, but sometimes we don't let them because we know better. And then how are we going to get any new monks and nuns, young monks and nuns, if they feel like they don't have anything to offer? You know, having something to offer is a big part of wanting to join a community, that you have a place, that you have something to share, something that's of value to others. But what winds up happening is that when you have young people, they're just always asked to revamp the website, and no one really understands how the website works. They are asked to revamp the website, they get burnt out, and then they leave, and they're not nourished or supported in their Dharma life, and they're not appreciated for all of the like fine-tuned mechanisms of whatever technology they're helping with, and they get bored and leave. They also will see some of the outdated ways we have in terms of our policies. Maybe things around hierarchy, maybe things around our relationship with Tibetans, maybe things around the patriarchy. And the kids see the problematic pieces in our policy, point them out, but no one will listen because this is just how it's always been. And seniority equals better. And that's not true always. So I think that when we're talking about harmony, we also want to be talking about invitation and acceptance and encouragement, because we don't want the Dharma to die with us, and we don't want the fourfold Sangha to die with us. What are your thoughts about that? Why do you think there's not as many young people getting ordained, especially in the West? Is there something about how each of us can think of our own seniority that's more like mentorship and less like dominance?
Very good question. I hope other people have also answers.
Yeah. It's just my own, impression. So please, you guys share. Yes, Venerables at Dorje Pummel, please.
There's also a matter of finances, which is a totally
Yes.
different issue, but it's very important.
Huge. Yeah, huge. I think that's a really important point. And so, it's hard to invest in the potential of people, isn't it? It's much easier to say, welcome if you have your own money and you're independently wealthy. Of course, you're welcome here. You can have free classes, figure out where to live, figure out how to eat. You have your retirement fund, you have your pension, you have the house that you sold, But yeah, we'll give you free classes, sure. Or we'll give you discounted classes, sure. But that means, what about young people that don't have anything? And I remember like I had a whole year once where I ate nothing but the ramen noodles the Vietnamese community gave us. The ramen noodle year. Thank goodness I was only 25 or else I wouldn't have survived. And to have the trust that you'll be looked after when there's nothing really saying that it will is a big leap of faith. And also not necessarily good common sense, so I think this financial piece is huge, but it's hard to encourage lay people to support monastics they haven't met yet, or to support monastics that are too new in their path and too new in themselves to show anything for it externally, to invest in potential. So if that's a conversation we can have in our communities, because often we hear community members saying, oh, I wish there were more teachers that spoke our language. I wish there were more teachers who were younger. I wish there were blah, 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 blah. And it's because no one is supporting the people in their, early years to get well studied and to get well trained and to be held and mentored in such a way that they become amazing teachers when they're older. So somehow creating conversations where we're investing in the potential of people, I think is huge. Yeah, please, Venerable.
What did I want to say? Yeah, the problem is for European cultures and maybe from Western cultures, we become more secular. So and people are seeing through the church what is religion, and the problem is also that people mostly view monasticism and Buddhist monasticism through religious eyes.
Yeah.
And since they already have the cultural upbringing of being more secular, they have this opposition to want, even if they enter Buddhism, to becoming monastics, because they see it from the Catholic perspective, mostly Catholic perspective. I think that's one big area, and of course the judgment from the community, of course, and from the peers and stuff like this. That's one perspective, and not seeing the benefit actually in today's world in the West of not working. Let's say also we come back to the finances. So
yeah, it's a really good point about the secular side. And His Holiness has been so skillful in keeping conversations with scientists and having conversations with psychologists and having these big forums that really help Buddhism be more accessible to the secular world. And I think that we need to kind of live in his example in so many ways, but also in that way of what are the conversations that are relevant for the people of this day and age? And what is Buddhism have to say about that? Because of course, Buddhism will have something to say about almost anything, right? Anything relevant in the world, anything relevant internal to the individual. So kind of asking, like, what are people talking about? Right now I'm in Portland, Oregon. It's very progressive. All the kids are talking about identity and gender. So what does Buddhism have to say about identity and gender? We have a million things to say about identity. We have all sorts of interesting quotes about Tara and why she manifested as female. We have all sorts of interesting things we could pepper into that conversation. But somehow we're a little bit scared. Like, oh, that's political. It's like, it's just a conversation. Relax. And by having a conversation, it makes people feel like Buddhism remains relevant. And then if they see monastic people having relevant to them conversations, they might think, wow, they seem very secure in themselves, very stable in their identitylessness. How interesting. How interesting. I wonder what they're up to. I wonder what this sitting still is all about. I wonder what a life of study would show. So it's something about having one tiny finger in the world, not a whole foot, but just like a little bit of an awareness of what the world is talking about, and not getting lost in it, not starting to become like lay people or like start scrolling endlessly or like falling down the rabbit hole of the news or something, but like keeping one little touchstone of what are people talking about. And then especially in our community teachings that we probably all offer at Dharma centers, or our public talks or things online, making a point to mention current events and what a Dharma idea might be with in tandem with that. So keeping connection to the secular world, I think, is really relevant. Yeah, but it can become complicated because we can assume that our fellow monastics have similar political views, and then you find out that you don't, and that's quite awkward.
Yeah.
So, somehow being able to have it with a light touch, with flexibility, we're not landing on anything in particular. We're just living in the realm of maybe. And also, Buddhism has this to say about ethics. How would that be interpreted in this event or that event? Non-harmfulness, compassion, the classics.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that. So I have some other bits and pieces that might be interesting, but I think they're all probably self-evident stuff in the Vinaya about resolving conflicts. First, talking about the causes, basically just the afflictions, obviously. But there are ways to end disputes that I think are interesting to just name, and then we'll call it a day. So I appreciate you guys' patience and sticking with me for this talk. The ways of ending disputes discussed in the Vinaya, it's something that we don't probably talk about enough in community. When there's a dispute, sometimes you'd resolve the dispute in the assembly with the presence of the parties involved. So you're talking about it with everybody there. Sometimes disputes are resolved by remembering events. So the person recalls their innocence or their guilt, right? They're remembering, yes, I did do that, or no, I didn't do that. It's so simple, but sometimes it actually cuts the tension. Can we just remember what happened? Then sometimes it's as simple as saying, yes, I did that, but I was crazy due to insanity, right? And sometimes we really do, even if we don't have a mental health issue particularly, because of the nature of retreat and deep practice, or if we get lung, sometimes we get a little bit nuts, and then we come back to ourselves and say, you guys, I'm so sorry I was like that last month. I had terrible lung, and I really don't want to behave that way in future. So what we want is for people to voluntarily admit their wrongdoing and to not force them to confess. If they maintain a negative behavior that they're not admitting to, that becomes another issue. But so much is solved by the person just saying, yep, I did it. And everyone's saying, we understand, moving on, right? So the dispute is settled by a majority vote, the voting being those knowledgeable in Dharma. I think this is one interesting piece to sit with for a second. I know in some of the communities I've lived with, we've tried consensus where everybody has to agree, but actually it seems to be much more functional if a majority votes. Yeah, because there can always be one person who's really stuck in their afflictions that can take over the whole process if you're operating by consensus. And the question becomes, who gets to vote? Who gets to vote? And here's a situation where the community themselves needs to decide in advance of conflict who gets to vote. So in Chenrezig, when I lived there, there was a criteria of you were a probationary member for 1 year, and then after 1 year, everyone would decide, yep, you're official, and then you could start to vote at meetings. you know, but basically it's just you decide, yeah, but deciding before the conflict. And once you've decided, the letting it go seems to be emphasized in the Vinaya a lot. Like when the matter has been resolved, stop talking about it, right? Sometimes there's the conflicts resolved when just evidence is presented, and then the accused person can remember their mistake. Sometimes long disputes, it's recommended to bring in an elder or a mediator for each side. And it really is like good old-fashioned mediation and the way that we would think about mediation these days. So it's something interesting to sit with, that if it's just a log jam and people are not sorting out their issues, what if you bring in a mediator, someone to advocate for both parties and have those quiet conversations? I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that when you let things brew, what winds up happening is something pops for the community in a dramatic, painful way, or one of the monastics just quietly leaves and often disrobes and feels deeply disillusioned. And we don't want either of those things to happen. We don't want a big community disruption because things have just festered and brewed and gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And we also don't want people to just sadly be disillusioned. And what winds up happening in a lot of communities is we're paralyzed, not knowing how to speak about tension. And because of that paralysis, people are left to dealing with things all by themselves, or reaching out to their old friends and their old ways of being and acting. And they kind of lose the Dharma benefit and support. And they wind up kind of circling back to their old ways, because that's where they had some kind of love and connection. So being bold enough and brave enough to try something, to break up the log jam. I don't know if you have this expression in Italian and French, log jam, to break up, you know, when things have gotten stuck together, to say, you guys, can we talk about the fact that, fill in the blank. You know, when people are having attachment issues, when people are having anger issues, when people are having not taking responsibility, when they're having entitlement issues, but also framing these things in terms of all of us in a community can be the one that falls into this trap. We're not talking about just one person. It's just this one situation is bringing it to light. And they've become like a mindfulness bell, waking us up to something we haven't spoken about enough. So recently, I've been asked to start thinking about how to build a nuns training program here in Portland, Oregon, for Rebjungmas, under the guidance of Yangzi Rinpoche, Geshe Ngawang Genden's Tulku, the tall one, you guys know, in France particularly. And so I've been asking different people like Venerable Pema Chodron, and been asking my own teacher, Geshe Taji Sering, all about advice. And you know, I'm expecting some sort of monastic rules or some sort of guidelines, and all of them keep saying, remember compassion, remember Lojong, and have community meetings where you can talk openly and safely with each other. Yeah, compassion, Lojong, and talk. Yeah, but talk in formats where it is just the monastics of that community, and you are just boldly vulnerable with each other and hold the space so kindly and just try and figure out ways to be at ease with each other. It's so important. And a lot of what makes that possible is what I talked about at the beginning. Just keep showing up. You can't always show up. Sometimes your health, sometimes logistics, sometimes family. But if your baseline assumption is, I'm going to show up whenever I can. I'm going to show up to class. I'm going to show up to Gompa Clean. I'm going to show up to maintenance. I'm going to show up to raking the leaves. I'm going to show up whenever I can. And it's not going to be my assumption that I can't or I won't. I'm going to have a pace that I can manage as an individual. I'm not going to burn myself out. But my assumption is going to be I need to keep showing up for myself, for my community, and my practice. and it will get better. So I hope some of these thoughts have been useful. A lot of the material I gathered was from Choosing Simplicity, which is a nice text on the Vinaya written by a Taiwanese senior nun, but there's many beautiful ones out there. And I think unless there's any extra questions or thoughts, we can call it a day. Thank you so much for your time.
Could you tell a little bit more how far you are in your preparation for the new setup? You have to already ask a lot of advice of different teachers, but can you tell a little bit more about what is the potential and the building or what this kind of aspect?
Yeah, it's called the Maitripa Rabjungma Community, and what we have is land. So, and we have a little mobile home. We call them trailers in America, a little mobile home, which is where I live. And then there's a big old farmhouse that's 100 years old and needs a lot of maintenance. And there's a big old barn, which we're going to make into the Gompa. But the vision is that we will have 8 Rabjungmas starting from scratch, all ordained at the same time, that probably by Jado Rinpoche. We'll ask Jado Rinpoche to ordain them. And for 3 years, they're going to be getting very, very intensive training while only having Rabjung vows. So they'll really get an excellent foundation in how to teach, like pedagogy. They'll get a foundation in the main Lojong texts, particularly 7-point mind training, Geshe Chikawa. They're going to get a really good training in Bodhisattva vows. And they'll learn some basics of Tibetan medicine in order to look after themselves, not in order to be practitioners of Tibetan medicine, but just in order to keep their own physical health up. And there's also going to be training for community service type activities like prayers at the time of death and spiritual care counseling and mediation and those sorts of things. So Yangzi Rinpoche is going to be looking after the program and bringing in different guest teachers to do kind of specialized trainings, you know, like here's how to lead a puja and here's how to make a torma and here's stuff about Vinaya. And then I'm going to be the day-to-day person helping to look after them. And our first thing is going to be this summer. We're going to have a 10-day retreat for people that are interested to just kind of see what the interest level is. But it's really, really early days. We need to do a lot of grant writing and fundraising to have the structures for the nuns. So we're going to have 8 little tiny huts and then 1 communal shared kitchen. But so far we have the land and we have Yangzi Rinpoche and we have me and a barn. So slowly pray for us. If you have any suggestions or ideas, please do email me. I'm gathering advice from everywhere I can think of. So all right, any other questions or thoughts?
Well, thank you so much from my side, from our side, from the IMI side. So, yeah, so fresh to hear all your ideas and listen to your experience. You've indeed lived in many communities, and then you're very, yeah, well, very intelligent and very schooled in, yeah, a lot of psychological thing and. Yeah, it was very, very refreshing to hear and a lot of reminders I take from this talk with me. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Venerable. It's nice to see you guys. And oh, the nuns at Dorji Pomo, did you want to add something?
Well, I just wanted to ask why Rabjungmas and not Getsumas?
The idea is that we want them to have very, very solid foundation and not too much pressure. So it's kind of like if for some reason after the 3 years, if they decide it's too much for them, there's less of a fault giving back Rabjungva vows than giving back Getsulma vows. But the hope is that they'll be very, very well trained and then go on to take Getsulma vows, maybe at Travasti Abbey, maybe in India. So they won't be with us forever, but we're just going to be there to give them a really good foundational training with as little pressure as possible. So that's why I wrote this.
And are the hopes that they will go on to Gelomas?
I mean, personally, yes. So because, I find having Gelungma vows really beneficial for my mind, and I think it's really important. But I think really that's a case by case, teacher by teacher, student by student question. So as they like, as they like. Yeah. Thank you so much, you guys.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go ahead and dedicate.
Yeah, one
Oh,
more.
sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's so inspirational. It's a really very, very interesting and beneficial talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to see all of you, and I hope we can all meet again soon.
I want to ask something, Yönten.
Oh, sure.
We
Yeah,
shared some emails a time ago. I don't know if you remember about me. I'm in IRTK. And what do you mean for Buddhist pedagogy?
I mean, how to teach. Yeah, so it's
Okay.
like we have the Dharma in us, but how to explain it in ways people understand.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, like that.
Mhm.
Don't get much training in how to teach, so we thought we would try to do that. Yeah, yes, Venerable, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question about that pedagogy. How you will do that? Will you Western teachers, professionals, pedagogists, or who will use who will you use?
Yeah, a combo. I am a big fan of the Socratic method, and so I like to. So I will, explain some pedagogy from the perspective of the Socratic method. Then the dean of our college here at Maitripa College, Namdrol, who used to be a nun, she has a PhD in education and these sorts of things. So she will also teach some classes, and we'll get lots of guest speakers so that these nuns get a really good cross-fertilization of different perspectives. So it will be maybe 3 or 4 people teaching pedagogy. Yeah, like that. Thank you so much, everybody. And let's dedicate. Janshu Semcho Rinpoche Make Panam Ke Gyoji Ke Panyam Pame Payang Gonde Gondu Pelwa Sho. And may all of our teachers show the aspect of good health and long life, and we continuously meet them until samsara ends. Thank you so much.